The clock in the grand hall of Blackwood Manor chimed 12 times, each resonant strike echoing through the cavernous, unlit corridors. It was precisely midnight, and the annual New Year's Eve masquerade ball was in full boisterous swing. Laughter mingled with the strains of a live jazz band, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, old wood, and illicit champagne. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch, a man known more for his quiet demeanor than his festive spirit, leaned against a dusty velvet curtain, observing the masked guests. He was only here as a courtesy to his eccentric Aunt Seraphina, the manor's equally eccentric owner, who insisted on throwing the most elaborate and often chaotic parties in the county. Alistair's attention was drawn to a woman standing by the fireplace. For back to him, she wore a stunning emerald green gown and an intricate Venetian mask, adorned with peacock feathers, that perfectly concealed her face. This was Eleanor Vance, the celebrated opera singer, whose sudden appearance in the small, reserved town of Oakhaven had caused quite a stir. Eleanor was known for her dramatic flair, both on and off stage, and tonight, she seemed to be at the peak of her enigmatic charm. Surrounded by a small cluster of admirers, she held a delicate, half-empty flute of champagne, her gloved hand gesturing gracefully as she spoke. Suddenly, the jazz music swelled, and a flurry of masked dancers swept between Alistair and Eleanor. It was a momentary interruption, a cascade of silken laughter that lasted no more than 10 seconds. When the dancers parted, the space by the fireplace was empty. Eleanor Vance was gone. Alistair blinked, a frown creasing his brow. He was certain he hadn't seen her leave the small circle of her admirers. He pushed himself away from the curtain, his professional instincts instantly alert. He moved towards where she had been standing, subtly scanning the faces of those who remained. Mr. Harrison Thorne, a stoic local historian, looked bewildered. Mrs. Clara Beaumont, a gossipy socialite, was adjusting her own mask with a puzzled expression. Lord Worthington, a jovial but often inebriated aristocrat, merely shrugged, assuming she had simply moved to another part of the hall. "Did anyone see where Miss Vance went?" Alistair asked, his voice low, but firm enough to cut through the din. The group looked at each other, then back at the empty space. "She was just here," Mrs. Beaumont declared, her voice tinged with alarm. "One moment, she was telling us about her plans for a new concert tour, and the next, poof." She snapped her fingers dramatically. Alistair walked to the fireplace, his eyes meticulously sweeping over the intricate carvings, the heavy mantelpiece, and the ornate rug. There were no hidden doors, no secret panels that could have spirited her away. He looked behind the large leather-bound armchairs that flanked the fireplace. Nothing. The grand hall was filled with hundreds of people, yet not one person seemed to have witnessed Eleanor's departure. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the air at the stroke of midnight. He pulled out his small, discreet notebook and pen, ignoring the curious glances from those around him. This was not a sudden exit. This was a disappearance. His mind, trained for the peculiar and the perplexing, immediately began to piece together the fragments of the impossible. Eleanor Vance, an international celebrity, couldn't just vanish from a crowded room in the middle of a private party without a single witness. It defied logic. It defied physics. Alistair decided to begin with a quick, discreet canvass. He approached the jazz band members first, as they had the highest vantage point. The saxophonist, a young man named Leo, recalled seeing her just a moment before the big 12 o'clock riff. He hadn't seen her leave. The pianist, a gruff veteran named Marcus, merely grunted that he was too busy making music to watch guests. Next, Alistair spoke to his Aunt Seraphina, who, despite her age, was still dancing with surprising vigor. "Eleanor vanished, you say?" she exclaimed, her eyes wide with a mix of intrigue and mild annoyance. "Well, that girl always did love a dramatic exit. Perhaps she's just gone to refresh her champagne, or perhaps she's found a handsome stranger and slipped away for a midnight rendezvous." She winked, dismissing the matter with a wave of her feathered fan. Alistair knew his aunt well enough to understand that she rarely took anything seriously, especially not at her own parties. He, however, took it very seriously. His gaze drifted to the tall, mullioned windows that overlooked the stormy, moonless gardens. The glass was firmly shut, secured with old, heavy latches. The sheer drop from the second-story hall meant no one could have simply slipped out through a window without elaborate preparation, which would have surely been noticed. The main entrance, a massive double door, was guarded by two burly security personnel who swore that no one matching Eleanor's description had left the hall since the clock struck 11. Alistair's investigation led him back to the fireplace. He knelt, running his gloved fingers over the polished marble hearth. He found nothing unusual. He glanced upwards, noticing the heavy, ornate chandelier directly above the spot where Eleanor had been standing. It was a massive iron structure, intricately carved, but it showed no signs of disturbance. He then moved towards the adjacent, smaller drawing room, separated by heavy velvet drapes. It was less crowded, a sanctuary for quieter conversations. He parted the drapes, stepping inside. The room was almost empty, save for a lone figure sitting by the cold hearth, sketching in a notepad. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, Harrison Thorne's younger brother, a reclusive architect known for his fascination with ancient mechanisms and hidden passages. Eris, unlike his brother, had an air of quiet intensity that bordered on the unsettling. He rarely attended social events, and his presence tonight was unusual. "Dr. Thorne," Alistair began, "did you happen to see Ms. Vance leave the main hall just before midnight?" Eris looked up. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, blinked slowly. "Ms. Vance," he mused, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Ah, the vanishing soprano. Yes, I saw her, detective. Or rather, I saw the moment she ceased to be there." "And what did you see?" Alistair pressed, his heart quickening. Eris closed his sketchpad, revealing a detailed drawing of a complex pulley system. "I saw nothing, detective, and that, in itself, is the most intriguing observation. She didn't walk away. She didn't fall. She simply wasn't." His smile widened. "A perfect vanishing act. Wouldn't you agree?" Alistair felt a prickle of unease. Eris Thorne's response was too calm, too precise, almost as if he was describing a magic trick rather than a human disappearance. The architect's keen interest in the mechanics of illusion and his presence in the relatively deserted drawing room, positioned perfectly to observe the main hall, raised a red flag. Could Eris Thorne, with his knowledge of hidden spaces, be more than just an observer? Alistair thanked him and walked back into the main hall, his mind racing. The impossible had just happened. Eleanor Vance, the opera diva, had vanished into thin air at the stroke of midnight, leaving behind a baffled crowd, a half-empty glass of champagne, and a growing sense of dread that told Alistair this was no mere magic trick. This was a crime, and it had just begun. He knew that the key to unlocking this mystery lay not in where she went, but how she managed to disappear without a trace in a room full of people. The manor itself, old and full of secrets, felt like it was holding its breath. He had to uncover its secrets, and fast. The atmosphere in Blackwood Manor shifted instantly from festive to funereal. The jazz band had stopped playing, replaced by the low, anxious murmuring of guests who were now more interested in the exit than the next dance. Detective Alistair Finch ignored the growing panic, focusing instead on the cold, hard facts. He knew that in a mystery of this scale, the house itself was often the accomplice. Alistair returned to the spot where Eleanor Vance had last been seen. He dismissed the crowd, cordoning off the area with a length of silk ribbon he borrowed from a nearby decoration. He knelt again, this time with a magnifying glass pulled from his coat. His eyes weren't looking for Eleanor anymore. They were looking for a seam, a hinge, or a scratch on the floor that shouldn't be there. He moved the heavy mahogany armchair. Nothing. He rolled back the corner of the Persian rug. The floorboards were solid oak, centuries old, and pinned down with iron nails that had rusted into place. Then he looked at the fireplace once more. It was a massive walk-in structure of gray stone, deep enough to roast an entire ox. The soot at the back was undisturbed, but as Alistair leaned inside, he noticed something peculiar. The air inside the chimney wasn't moving upward. In a house this old, on a night this cold, there should have been a draft pulling air up toward the roof. Instead, there was a faint, rhythmic thumping sound, like the heartbeat of a giant, coming from somewhere deep behind the hearth. Alistair reached out and pressed the stones at the back of the fireplace. Most were cold and solid, but one, a small, unassuming brick, near the base felt slightly warmer than the others. He pushed it. It didn't move. He pulled it. Nothing. Then he tried to twist it. With a groan of ancient gears, the entire back wall of the fireplace began to rotate. Not like a door, but like a revolving cylinder. He stepped back, just as a narrow opening appeared. Beyond, it lay a spiral staircase made of damp, green stone, descending into a darkness that smelled of salt and decay. "Detective," a voice whispered behind him. Alistair spun around, hand instinctively reaching for his service weapon. It was Harrison Thorne, the historian. He looked pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a glass of water. I saw you find it. My brother Eris, he used to talk about he said. The original builders were smugglers who needed a way to move goods from the cliffs to the house without being seen. Does your brother have a key to this? Alistair asked, his voice sharp. He doesn't need a key, Harrison replied, looking toward the drawing room where Eris had been sketching. He designed the restoration of this wing 10 years ago. He knows every hollow space in these walls. Alistair didn't wait for more. He clicked on his flashlight and stepped into the hidden passage. The air grew colder with every step he took. The staircase was narrow, forcing him to turn sideways. After 50 steps, the stairs ended in a long vaulted tunnel. The walls were lined with wine racks, but most of the bottles were empty and covered in thick cobwebs. As he moved deeper into the tunnel, the thumping sound grew louder. It wasn't a heartbeat. It was the sound of a gasoline engine. He followed the noise until he reached a heavy steel door, strangely modern compared to the rest of the manor. It was slightly ajar. He peered inside. The room was a high-tech nerve center. Monitors lined the walls, showing live feeds from every room in Blackwood Manor, including the Grand Hall. In the center of the room sat a chair, and on the floor beside it lay the emerald green mask Eleanor Vance had been wearing, but Eleanor wasn't there. Instead, the room was occupied by Eris Thorne. He was no longer the quiet architect from the drawing room. He was wearing a headset, his fingers dancing across a keyboard as he watched the screen, showing the panic in the hall above. "You're late," Detective Eris said, without looking back. The transition was supposed to be complete by 05. Found the fireplace mechanism faster than my calculations predicted. "Where is she, Eris?" Alistair demanded, leveling his gun at the man's head. "Where is Eleanor Vance?" Eris turned the chair around, a cold, clinical smile on his face. "Eleanor Vance doesn't exist. She never did. She was a performance, a projection created to test the social observation skills of this town's elite. The woman you saw tonight was a highly trained operative, wearing a prototype, holographic mesa-digital mask, if you will." Alistair's mind raced. "That's impossible. People touched her. She drank champagne. She was real enough to be seen." But the vanishing was simply the mesh being deactivated as she stepped into the revolving hearth. "She's already on a boat, 2 miles out at sea." Eris stood up, his hands raised in mock surrender. "This wasn't a kidnapping, Alistair. It was a demonstration for a very wealthy client who wants to know how easy it is to make someone disappear in plain sight." Suddenly, the monitors flickered. A new image appeared on the central screen. Aunt Seraphine's private office. The safe was open, and a shadowy figure was removing a thick stack of documents. "You didn't just want to show off a mask," Alistair realized, his blood running cold. "The disappearance was a distraction for a robbery." "Not just a robbery," Eris corrected. "An assassination of reputation. Those documents contain the true history of the Thorne family and the Blackwood estate. And now, thanks to your disappearance investigation, everyone will be too busy looking for a ghost to notice the real theft." The revelation hit Alistair with the force of a physical blow. The disappearance was an elaborate smokescreen, a theatrical distraction designed to draw all attention away from the true crime, while he, along with the entire Blackwood Manor, was captivated by the vanishing act of Eleanor Vance. Eris Thorne had meticulously orchestrated a sophisticated heist. The real target wasn't a person, but secrets, the very foundation upon which the Thorne family's long-standing reputation was built. Alistair didn't lower his gun. His mind, usually so clear and methodical, was now a whirlwind of betrayal and cunning. "The client," Alistair said, his voice strained. "Who is this client that pays for such an elaborate ruse?" "Eris," merely smiled, a cold, calculating glint in his eyes. A client who understands that in this age of instant information, the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb, but a well-placed lie. Or, in this case, a well-placed truth. He gestured toward the monitors. The operative, who was Eleanor Vance, is now securing the documents. My brother, Harrison, with his obsession for history, has inadvertently been collecting evidence for years that could dismantle our families. Standing, your family, Alistair repeated, confused. But you're just cousins, Eris. You're not directly in line for the manor. My branch of the Thorne family was deliberately sidelined a century ago, Eris explained, his voice laced with bitterness. My ancestors were the true visionaries, the ones who truly understood the power that lay not in land and titles, but in information and influence. The first Blackwood Manor wasn't just a house. It was a fortress, a hub for a network that controlled trade routes and political alliances. But my great-great-grandfather was deemed too radical and disinherited. Alistair listened. His focus split between Arisa's confession and the monitors. The operative, now unmasked as a lean, agile woman in tactical gear, was swiftly moving through Aunt Seraphine's office, methodically emptying the safe. The documents she was taking were old, bound in leather, and clearly of immense historical value. You're not just stealing documents, Eris, Alistair stated, a chilling realization dawning on him. You're trying to rewrite history, but you claim what you believe is rightfully yours by exposing your own family's past sins. Precisely, Eris confirmed, his smile never wavering, a swift surgical strike against the narrative. My client isn't interested in money. They're interested in disrupting the established order. They saw the value in using our family's hidden past to create a new future. A future where their own influence can thrive unchallenged. Alistair's eyes fell upon a specific monitor that showed Aunt Seraphine's personal study, a smaller, less prominent safe, hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. A trick, often employed in old houses, was also open. From it, the operative was carefully extracting a single-aged wooden box. This box wasn't filled with papers. It held a single, tarnished silver locket and a brittle, yellowed photograph. What's in that box? Alistair demanded, his gun still steady. Eris chuckled. The true prize. That locket belongs to the original builder of Blackwood Manor, my great-great-grandfather. It contains a coded message, a key to a vast network of contacts and resources that have been lying dormant for a century. The photograph is of his true heir, a descendant who was supposed to take over his underground empire, but vanished without a trace. Alistair's breath caught in his throat. He remembered a story Aunt Seraphina had told him as a child, a hushed tale about a long-lost ancestor who had run away with a gypsy dancer, disappearing from the family tree entirely. The vanishing heir, Alistair murmured. And you believe you are that heir, or at least the one destined to reclaim that legacy. I am the one who understands the true vision, Eris corrected. And now, thanks to this engineered chaos, that legacy will finally be activated. Suddenly, the security panel on Arisa's desk flashed red. An alarm blared, not from inside the manor, but from the cliffside. Damn it, Eris muttered, his composure finally cracking. My Eleanor Vance operative has triggered a sensor on the boat. A rogue patrol has spotted her. The police are already on their way, Alistair said, feeling a surge of grim satisfaction. Your perfect plan is crumbling, Eris. No, detective, Eris countered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. This merely adds another layer to the illusion. They'll find a boat with a disguised operative and stolen documents. They'll believe that was the entire scope of the operation. They won't look for the deeper network. As Eris spoke, he pressed a series of keys. On the main monitor, the image of Aunt Seraphine's office changed. The operative was now placing a small, unmarked device on the desk, right next to the emptied safe. It was a digital scrambler, designed to corrupt any data it came into contact with. A parting gift, Eris said, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Any evidence left behind will be useless. And by the time they realize the true extent of what was taken, my client and I will be far beyond their reach, activating the true power of the Thorn legacy. Alistair knew he couldn't let Eris escape with that information. The theft of the locket and the activation of this dormant network could have far-reaching, dangerous consequences. He lunged forward, aiming to disable Eris, but the architect was surprisingly quick. He pressed a hidden button on his desk, and a section of the floor beneath Alistair hissed open. A trapdoor. Alistair fell tumbling into a narrow, dark chute. He landed hard on a pile of something soft and musty, the scent of old fabric filling his nostrils. He scrambled to his feet, disoriented, and realized he was in a vast subterranean storage room filled with crates and boxes, Manor's forgotten treasures. High above, he heard the metallic clang of the trap door slamming shut. He was trapped, again, in the labyrinthine depths of Blackwood Manor. Eris Thorn, with his cunning and his digital wizardry, had outmaneuvered him, turning the entire manor into a stage for a heist that went far beyond mere material gain. The disappearance at midnight wasn't just about a vanished opera singer. It was about the vanishing of truth, orchestrated by a family steeped in centuries of shadow. Alistair lay in the darkness of the subterranean vault, his lungs burning from the dust he had stirred up during his fall. Above him, the metallic echo of the trapdoor seemed to vibrate through his very bones. He was buried alive in the history of the Thorn family, surrounded by crates of forgotten relics and the heavy, suffocating silence of a grave. But Alistair Finch was not a man to be defeated by architecture. He clicked on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal rows upon rows of chests, stamped with the Thorn crest. He realized then that the Undermanor was much larger than Harrison had described. This wasn't just a smuggler's tunnel. It was an archive. He moved quickly, his eyes scanning the walls for any sign of a lever or a door. He knew Eris would be heading for the cliffside exit, where the boat awaited. If he didn't find a way out in the next few minutes, the secrets of the locket and the dormant network would vanish forever. As he moved deeper into the vault, he spotted a small, modern-looking box attached to the wall. It was a secondary server node, identical to the ones he had seen in Eris's control room. Eris hadn't just built a heist, he had built a network. Alistair pulled a small multi-tool from his belt and pried open the casing. Inside was a mess of fiber-optic cables and a glowing blue port. Alistair didn't have a laptop, but he had his smart Fi-End model issued by the Special Branch for field analysis. He plugged a specialized adapter into the phone and then into the node. "Come on, Alistair," he whispered, his fingers flying across the touchscreen. "Talk to me." The screen flickered, showing a stream of encrypted code. He wasn't trying to hack the main system that would take hours. He was looking for a bypass, a back door that every architect leaves in their design in case they get locked out of their own creation. He found it buried under a file labeled Project Ouroboros. He tapped into the security overrides, and, with a soft hiss, a heavy stone panel at the far end of the vault slid aside. He sprinted through the opening and found himself in a narrow maintenance shaft that led upward. He climbed with a desperate intensity, his hands scraping against the rough stone until he emerged through a small hatch in the floor of the manor's library. The room was empty, the party guests having long since fled or been ushered into the gardens by the local police. He didn't head for the main doors. Instead, he ran toward the master study. He knew the geography of the manor well enough to know there was a direct balcony overlooking the cliffs. As he burst onto the balcony, the salt-heavy wind hit him, and he saw them. Far below, near the base of the jagged rocks, a sleek, black motorboat was bobbing in the dark water. A figure in tactical gear, the Eleanor Vance operative, was handing a small wooden box to Eris Thorn, who stood on the lower pier. The lighthouse beam from Oakhaven Point swept across the scene, illuminating the silver locket in Eris's hand for a fleeting second. "Eris," Alistair shouted, his voice barely audible over the crashing waves. Eris looked up, his face a mask of shock and then cold fury. He didn't hesitate. He gestured to the operative, who pulled a flare gun and fired it into the air. The pier was suddenly bathed in a blinding red light. "It's over, Alistair," Eris yelled back. The transmission has already started. The network is waking up. Alistair looked at his phone. The connection to the vault's node was still active. He realized he didn't need to catch Eris physically to stop him. He could kill the network from the inside. He began a massive data wipe command, a scorched earth script he had learned during his time inside. If I can't have you, Eris, Alistair muttered, I'll take your legacy. He pressed execute. On the pier below, Eris looked down at a tablet he was holding. The screen went red, then black. He began to scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage that was lost to the wind. The Eleanor Vance operative, seeing the game was up, shoved Eris into the water and jumped into the boat, roaring the engine to life. She didn't care about the Thorn legacy. She was a mercenary, and her only goal was survival. The boat sped away into the darkness. Just as the first police sirens reached the manor's gates, Alistair leaned against the balcony railing, exhausted. He watched as the local authorities swarmed the pier, pulling a shivering broken Eris Thorn from the freezing Atlantic. The silver locket, however, was nowhere to be seen, lost in the depths or taken by the operative. He couldn't be sure. Aunt Seraphina appeared at his side, her feathered fan limp in the damp air. Alistair, dear, she said, her voice unusually soft. Is it finished? The disappearance is solved. Auntie, Alistair replied, looking out at the empty horizon. But the mystery of what the Thorns were really hiding, I think that's just begun. He looked at his phone. The data wipe was 100% complete. He had erased the network, but he had managed to save one single file, the photograph of the vanishing heir. He looked at the face in the old, yellowed picture. It wasn't a stranger. It was a face he recognized from a different cold case, a man who had been missing for 50 years. A man who bore a striking resemblance to a high-ranking official in the current government. The clock struck 1 a.m. The new year had started, and the world was a different place. The shadows of Blackwood Manor were no longer just legends. They were now his responsibility.